This is the vision of the Yukon Word Society, and many established writers in the Yukon and, Atlin. We consider Atlin part of Yukon. So when I say the Yukon, I also mean Atlin. And it's not my vision. I didn't initiate this vision, yet I'm excited by it. I can see the need. I hear it from writers. I see it our monthly Words Out Loud event, where we have, a couple of local headliners, sometimes beginning writers, sometimes, new and emerging writers, and sometimes established writers. And then we have an open mic, and I'm astounded that each and every time we have a longer list than we can get through unless we go overtime. And there is perhaps something happening in the Yukon right now around the word arts. And the university is seeing it. Yukon College transitioned to Yukon University a few years ago, and Yukon University has always had many years, had creative writing classes taught by Jamela Hagan, and suddenly they're taking off, and they fill almost as soon as they open. We receive just over 1,000 new people coming to the Yukon every year, moving to the Yukon every year. And so the numbers for us, because we're only a population of roughly 45,000 in the Yukon and 38,000 of them are in Whitehorse, that's a lot. That's a huge influx of people. So the Yukon University also recently hired Ivan Coyote, and Ivan is hosting Free Write Fridays and has partnered with the Yukon Art Center to bring up some big name authors and have public talks. So there's a lot going on, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg around what's happening in terms of the writing community here. I want to establish writing groups, like book club version of writing groups online across the Yukon, so that it's not just people who live in Whitehorse who have access to these. People in, Burwash Landing or Dawson City or Haines Junction or Watson Lake, all of the small communities in the Yukon can have access to that. And we can start to support and grow the writing community here in the Yukon. There are some very well-established writers here in the North, and the North is becoming ever more visible, I believe, in the Canadian landscape. And with climate change, also with Indigenous self-governance, there's a lot going on in the North that impacts all of us as Canadians, and from which we can all learn. And many of those writers touch on those topics or delve deep into those topics. And it would be great to hear from more Indigenous voices, directly from Indigenous voices, and instead of other people telling Indigenous the stories of Indigenous people. There are 14 First Nations in the Yukon, 11 of which are self-governing. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from that. But writers can also contribute. Indigenous writers can also contribute to telling those stories. Now, I was talking to my travel insurance provider because my partner and I buy travel insurance to come to Atlin because if we needed to be medevaced, I have learned that that cost would be incurred by us. And so we buy travel insurance. My travel insurance provider said, so when you cross the border, just make sure that, there's some indication that you're crossing a border because, we're driving, we're not flying, so how would they know that we come to Atlin? I said, there is no border coming down to BC. And she said, well, just stop and buy something. I said, there are no stores. Well, you need some sort of proof that you crossed into BC. So I don't know how we'll do it, pick up a BC stone on the way across the border, but somehow we will need to prove. But yes, there is no border. And Atlin people, as you've seen driving through the town of Atlin, it's an unincorporated town. It's a very small town. The population is said to be maybe 300 in the winter and maybe 500 in the summer. There are, many people who have summer homes. When Atlin people need medical services, they generally go into Yukon, into Whitehorse. When they need a hospital, they definitely do, unless they're medevac down to Vancouver. When they need maybe to do a big grocery shop, or they need to go to Canadian Tire, or they want to go to Walmart, they go into Whitehorse. So there is a lot of traffic between Atlin and Whitehorse. Not to mention, of course, the tourist traffic. And so most of us see it as all as one. It's BC and Yukon, this part of BC and Yukon as one. And you have to come into the Yukon to get to Atlin. Don't get me started. It should be part of the Yukon. And if people want to go to a bank, there's no bank here. There are a couple of bank machines, maybe 3 now, but there's no bank. So there are many things, many services that can't be made available in a tiny community like this. So yeah, it is. We share a culture, and that culture is the North. I decided to take a class at Yukon University from Jamela Hagan. And it was a class primarily focused on memoir, creative nonfiction. Seemed most of us kind of took it in the personal to the personal. And it was an amazing class. Everybody in the class continues to talk about it when we run into each other. It was quite something. We had an incredible array of students in that class, from people who are definitely in their 70s and maybe 1 or 2 in their 80s, to a student who was 16, 17, and a songwriter. And so for the final assignment, everybody was asked to bring something that they wanted to read, perhaps something that they had written or somebody else had written. And the young singer-songwriter sang a song that she had written. It was stunning. It was beautiful. And a young woman from India told this story of this young man that she's betrothed to, who's coming to marry her and bringing his family, and it was quite the story. And then another person in our class was going through a transition from male to female, and went through that transition with all of us, telling the story as they went. Not necessarily intentionally, but just feeling, I think, for all of us, the trust build in the class. And so telling more and more. All of us were sharing a lot of very personal revelations or experiences. So it was quite the experience for me. And at the end of that, Yukon Words happened to post the position for their first executive director. And simultaneously, I guess, somebody reached out from the class who's on the board of Yukon Words and asked me if I would read a piece I had done at the class on moose hunting. And so if I would read it at a festival in the winter. And so I read it, and I just felt like, the class experience, the reading experience, and then this position posted that is just like read as though it was tailor-made for somebody with my background. it was all too perfect. You know, I had to slot myself into all of that and experience this world. And let it take me on a journey, because I don't know where it's going. And I am continuing to flex my writing muscle and explore that potential, at the same time as learning a lot about the writing community and what it and they need, and getting inspired by, how could we do that? You know, what might that look like? And it's the inspiration I needed at this point in my life.